Between the 1970s and the 1980s, a cluster of scientists working on classified British defense projects died under unusual circumstances. Some were found hanged, some in their cars, some in circumstances that colleagues described as inconsistent with the official explanations that followed. Each case was investigated individually. Each was officially explained. And yet the pattern of who died, what they worked on, and when it happened has been debated ever since. This is not a story about proving any single theory. It is a story about what happens when a pattern of individual events resists a clean collective explanation, and about what the Cold War context suggests about the world those scientists were operating in. Here's what they didn't tell you about the missing scientists. The cases most frequently discussed in this context involve researchers in the United Kingdom who worked on defense and technology projects during the 1970s and 1980s, a period of intense Cold War competition in areas including radar, satellite systems, electronic warfare, and early computing. These were not public figures. They were technical specialists. Many of them worked on or near classified programs. Over a period of roughly a decade, a number of them died. Pause for a second. The names and specific circumstances vary depending on which cases are included in the count. Conservative estimates focus on a core group. Broader estimates run higher. The BBC, the Sunday Times, and other outlets ran investigations and compiled case lists during the 1980s and 1990s. The Ministry of Defense conducted its own review and concluded there was no evidence of a coordinated pattern. That conclusion did not fully resolve the public debate. The cases that drew the most attention shared certain characteristics. The deaths were often ruled suicides, accidents, or left with open verdicts. The circumstances in some cases were described by families or colleagues as difficult to reconcile with the official findings, and the individuals involved in multiple cases had access to sensitive technical knowledge that would have been of significant value to foreign intelligence services. At what point does a series of isolated incidents start to look like a pattern? That is not a rhetorical question. It is a genuine methodological one. In any large population of people working in high-stress, sensitive environments over an extended period, some number of deaths from suicide, accident, and unexplained causes would be expected. The question is whether the rate and circumstances in this specific group during this specific period exceeded what baseline statistics would predict. That analysis has never been definitively completed to the satisfaction of researchers who have studied the cases. What has been completed is the individual investigations. And what those investigations produced, in a number of cases, were conclusions that families and colleagues found insufficient. And this is where it becomes a pattern. Arpad Alo, the physicist behind the chess rating system, is not part of this cluster, but his name illustrates a different point worth making before going further. The scientific community during the Cold War was not operating in a vacuum. It was operating inside a geopolitical competition in which knowledge was a strategic asset in the most literal sense. Governments on both sides of the Iron Curtain were running active programs to recruit, surveil, and where necessary neutralize individuals with specialized technical knowledge that could shift the balance of capability between competing powers. That is not a theory. It is the documented history of Cold War intelligence operations. The Soviet intelligence services were running active programs to recruit Western scientists. The KGB's Line S Directorate handled scientific and technical intelligence. Western agencies, including MI5, MI6, and the CIA, were doing the same in the other direction. This was the operating environment for every scientist working on sensitive defense projects in the West during this period. The question that environment raises is not whether any individual scientist was targeted. It is what the environment itself suggests about the risk profile of people who held valuable knowledge during a period of active intelligence competition. If the official explanation doesn't fully answer the questions, what fills the gap? Because in most of the cases discussed in this context, what fills the gap is ambiguity, open verdicts, unresolved timelines, circumstances that fit the official explanation, and also fit alternative explanations without definitively ruling either out. That ambiguity is the most honest description of where many of these cases stand, and this is the part most people don't expect. The most discussed specific case in this context, and the one that received the most sustained journalistic attention, is that of Gareth Williams, a GCHQ officer seconded to MI6 who was found dead in London in 2010 inside a locked hold-all bag in the bathtub of his safe house flat. The circumstances of his death were extensively investigated. A coroner's inquest concluded that he had probably been unlawfully killed. The Metropolitan Police subsequently concluded that they could not rule out self-inflicted death. The two official investigations produced directly contradictory conclusions. Williams worked in communications intelligence. His work involved highly classified signals intelligence operations. What he specifically worked on has not been publicly disclosed. His death remains officially unresolved. That case is not from the Cold War, it is from 2010, which suggests that the circumstances surrounding people who hold sensitive technical knowledge did not become less complicated when the Cold War ended. Now think about that. The Cold War provided the clearest geopolitical frame for understanding why scientists with specialized knowledge were strategic assets rather than simply researchers. But the underlying logic, that knowledge held by individuals can be a target of interest to competing powers, was not a feature of the Cold War alone. It is a feature of any environment in which technological advantage translates to strategic or military capability. And that environment did not end in 1991. Now fast forward to the reframe. The missing scientist narrative is often presented in one of two ways, either as evidence of a coordinated elimination program, which the available evidence does not definitively support, or as a collection of tragic but unrelated events that have been pattern matched by people looking for connections that are not there. The documented record suggests a more complicated picture than either of those framings. What we know is this: a group of people working on sensitive defense projects died under circumstances that official investigations found explainable, but that families, colleagues, and independent researchers found insufficiently explained. They worked during a period when intelligence agencies on multiple sides were actively engaged in targeting individuals with specialized knowledge. The geopolitical context made such individuals genuinely valuable as strategic assets, and in at least some cases, the official conclusions produced by separate investigations have directly contradicted each other. We have seen this pattern across this channel in a different form. In MK Ultra, where the records that survived told only a fragment of the story, because most were deliberately destroyed. In COINTELPRO, where the full picture required someone to physically take the documents and put them in the mail. In Operation Northwoods, where the plan was documented precisely because it was submitted through official channels and preserved as a result. What makes the missing scientist different is that the documentation in these individual cases does not point clearly toward a single explanation. It points toward ambiguity, and ambiguity in cases involving sensitive knowledge during a period of active intelligence competition is its own kind of signal, because at that point the absence of a clear explanation is part of what needs explaining. So here's the question worth sitting with. Each individual case in this pattern has an official explanation. Some of those explanations were accepted, some were disputed, some were produced by investigations that reached contradictory conclusions. And the collective pattern of deaths, circumstances, and unresolved questions in this group of people who worked in overlapping fields during overlapping periods has never been given a definitive collective accounting. If every case can be explained individually, but the pattern still does not sit right, which one do you trust? The explanation or the pattern? Tell me in the comments what you think, because that question does not have an answer that fully satisfies either side, and that is perhaps the most honest thing that can be said about it.